The account you're about to hear comes from Rebecca Martinez, a 38-year-old former intensive care nurse who now works in medical administration in Phoenix, Arizona. For 15 years, Rebecca has remained silent about the supernatural encounters that forced her to abandon the nursing career she loved. Only recently, after the demolition of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital, has she found the courage to share her story with the world. The events Rebecca describes took place between 2003 and 2009. During her tenure as a night shift nurse in the intensive care unit at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital in upstate New York. The hospital, built in 1924, had served the community for over 80 years before closing due to budget cuts and declining patient numbers. But according to Rebecca, some patients never truly left the building. St. Catherine's had a reputation among the local medical community for being a difficult place to work. The hospital struggled with high staff turnover rates, particularly among night shift workers. Nurses would quit after only a few months, citing stress, burnout, and an uncomfortable atmosphere that made their jobs unbearable. Rebecca's story reveals the true reason why so many medical professionals fled St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital. Her account, compiled from hours of recorded interviews, describes encounters with patients who had died in the hospital but continued to roam the halls, seeking comfort, attention, or simply refusing to accept that their time had ended. What Rebecca experienced goes beyond typical ghost stories. Her encounters involved spirits who were confused about their deaths, patients who didn't understand they were no longer alive, and souls trapped in the endless loop of hospital routine. These weren't malevolent entities seeking to harm the living. They were lost individuals who needed the same care and compassion they had sought while alive. The names of the hospital and patients have been changed to protect privacy and comply with medical confidentiality requirements. But every detail of Rebecca's experiences has been preserved exactly as she remembers them. Her story offers a unique glimpse into the intersection of medicine, death, and the supernatural, a world where healing and haunting walk hand in hand. Through sterile corridors, prepare yourself for a journey into one of medicine's most haunted institutions, where the boundary between patient and spirit becomes as thin as the line between life and death. This is Rebecca's story, and it will forever change how you think about hospitals, healing, and what happens to our souls when modern medicine can no longer help us. Chapter 1. The first assignment. I'll never forget my first night at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital. Rebecca begins, her voice carrying the exhaustion that still lingers from those years. It was September 3rd, 2003, and I had just graduated from nursing school with honors. I was 26 years old, full of idealism about helping people, and excited to start my career in intensive care nursing. Rebecca had specifically requested the night shift at St. Catherine's because it offered higher pay and, theoretically, a calmer work environment than the chaos of day shift nursing. The ICU at St. Catherine's was a 20-bed unit that served critically ill patients from across the region. The hospital looked imposing even in daylight, Rebecca recalls. It was this massive brick building with Gothic Revival architecture, complete with towers and arched windows that made it look more like a cathedral than a medical facility. At night, with only a few windows lit, it looked downright ominous. Rebecca's orientation was conducted by Supervisor Patricia Holmes, a veteran nurse who had worked at St. Catherine's for over 20 years. Patricia was professional but seemed oddly tense as she showed Rebecca through the ICU. Patricia kept making strange comments during the tour. Rebecca remembers. She'd say things like, Don't let the atmosphere get to you. Or some patients are more demanding than others, even after they don't need our help anymore. I thought she was just talking about difficult family members or patients with demanding personalities. The ICU was laid out in a traditional design with patient rooms arranged around a central nursing station. The unit occupied the entire fourth floor of the hospital, with large windows that looked out over the city and the mountains beyond. During the day, the unit was bright and bustling with activity. At night, however, the atmosphere changed dramatically. My first patient assignment included Mr. Henderson in room 407. Rebecca says he was a 72-year-old man recovering from major heart surgery. According to his chart, he was stable but required close monitoring. Patricia seemed nervous when she gave me his assignment. When Rebecca asked why, Patricia seemed concerned about Mr. Henderson. The supervisor gave her a cryptic warning: just remember that some patients need more attention than their medical condition would suggest. If you hear him calling for help during the night, check on him immediately. Don't ignore any requests from room 407. I assumed Mr. Henderson was anxious or confused, which is common in ICU patients, Rebecca explains. Postoperative delirium, medication side effects, and the stress of intensive care can make patients very demanding. I prepared myself for a challenging but manageable patient. But when Rebecca entered room 407 to introduce herself to Mr. Henderson, she found the room empty. The bed was made with fresh linens, and all the medical equipment had been removed. According to the room's status board, 407 was listed as unoccupied and ready for the next admission. I went back to Patricia and told her there must be a mistake. Rebecca recalls, I explained that room 407 was empty and asked for clarification about my patient assignment. Patricia's face went completely white, and she didn't say anything for the longest time. Finally, Patricia pulled Rebecca aside and explained that Mr. Henderson had died 3 days earlier, following complications from his heart surgery. His body had been removed, and the room had been cleaned and prepared for new patients. Patricia said she'd made a mistake in giving me that assignment. Rebecca says she apologized and quickly reassigned me to other patients. But I could see something in her eyes, not embarrassment about the error, but genuine fear. Rebecca spent her first night at St. Catherine's caring for 3 other ICU patients, all of whom were stable and required routine monitoring. But throughout the night, she kept glancing to wardroom 407, wondering about Patricia's strange behavior and the mix-up with the deceased patient. Around 3 in the morning, I was updating patient charts when I heard the call light from room 407. Rebecca recalls, her voice dropping to a whisper. The light at the nursing station was flashing, indicating that someone in that room was requesting assistance. Rebecca looked down the hallway toward room 407 and saw that the room was still dark and empty. She assumed the call light system was malfunctioning and made a note to report the maintenance issue in the morning. But as she turned back to her charting, she heard a voice calling from the direction of room 407. Nurse. Nurse, I need help. The voice was weak but clear, definitely coming from the empty room. I walked down the hall to room 407 and looked inside, Rebecca says. The room was still empty, but the call light button was pressed. I released the call, light and checked all the equipment, thinking maybe there was an electrical issue causing the false alarm. As Rebecca turned to leave the room, she heard the voice again, clearer this time. Please don't leave me alone. I'm scared. # chapter 2. The pattern emerges. Rebecca's second week at St. Catherine's revealed that the incident in room 407 was not an isolated occurrence. as she became more familiar with the ICU's routines and gained the trust of her colleagues. Other staff members began sharing their own experiences with unusual events on the night shift. Diane, one of the more experienced night shift nurses, pulled me aside after about 10 days on the job, Rebecca recalls. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about certain rooms. When I mentioned the call light incident in 407, she just nodded like she'd been expecting it. According to Diane, room 407 had been a problem for years. Multiple patients had died in that room, and afterward, the call light would frequently activate on its own. Night shift staff had learned to simply acknowledge the calls and reset the system, treating it as a maintenance issue rather than investigating further. Diane told me that several rooms in the ICU had similar issues, Rebecca explains. Rooms 401, 407, 412, and 418 were known for electronic malfunctions, unexplained temperature fluctuations, and what she called residual patient activity. Rebecca learned that St. Catherine's had an unusually high mortality rate for an ICU, not due to poor medical care, but because the hospital received many of the region's most critical cases. Patients often arrived at St. Catherine's as a last resort, when other facilities had exhausted their treatment options. The ICU saw a lot of death, Rebecca says quietly. Terminal cancer patients, massive heart attacks, severe trauma cases. We were often the place where families came to say goodbye rather than to seek cures. The high death rate had created what the staff euphemistically called environmental challenges. Certain rooms seemed to retain traces of their former occupants, creating an atmosphere that made both staff and new patients uncomfortable. I started paying closer attention to the patterns, Rebecca recalls. Room 407 wasn't the only one with call light issues. Room 412 had problems with the television turning on by itself, always tuned to the same channel that an elderly patient had been watching when she died. Room 418 had temperature control problems. It would become freezing cold at odd hours, no matter what the thermostat was set to. Rebecca's colleagues had developed coping strategies for dealing with these anomalies. They would reset malfunctioning equipment, adjust thermostats, and acknowledge false alarms without discussing the underlying causes. The unspoken rule was that these issues were maintenance problems, not supernatural occurrences. Nobody wanted to admit what we were all thinking. Rebecca explains. We were medical professionals, trained in science and evidence-based practice. Talking about ghosts or spirits would have made us sound unprofessional or mentally unstable. But the incidents were becoming too frequent and too specific to dismiss as equipment malfunctions. Rebecca began keeping a private log of unusual events, documenting the times, locations, and nature of each occurrence. Within a month, I had recorded over 30 incidents, Rebecca says. Call lights from empty rooms, televisions turning on by themselves, air conditioning systems malfunctioning in specific rooms, and what I started thinking of as phantom patient requests. The phantom patient requests were the most disturbing aspect of the phenomena Rebecca was witnessing. She would hear voices calling for water, pain medication, or assistance to the bathroom. But when she investigated, the calls were coming from rooms that were either empty or occupied by patients who were unconscious or sedated. I realized that I was hearing the voices of patients who had died in those rooms, Rebecca admits. They were still making the same requests they had made while alive, asking for comfort, attention, or help with basic needs. The recognition that she was encountering, the spirits of deceased patients, should have terrified Rebecca, but instead she felt a profound sense of compassion. These weren't malevolent ghosts trying to harm the living. They were confused souls who didn't understand that their medical needs could no longer be addressed. My nursing training kicked in, Rebecca explains. Whether they were alive or dead, these were still patients who needed care. I started responding to the phantom requests with the same professionalism I brought to caring for living patients. Chapter 3. Mrs. Chen's request 3 months into her employment at St. Catherine's. Rebecca encountered her first clearly identifiable spirit patient. The experience would fundamentally change her understanding of what was happening in the ICU and establish the approach she would take to caring for the hospital's supernatural residents. Mrs. Chen had been one of my patients during my 2nd month at St. Catherine's, Rebecca recalls. She was an 83-year-old woman with end-stage lung cancer who had come to the ICU for palliative care. She was a sweet lady who spoke limited English, but was always polite and grateful for any help. Mrs. Chen had died peacefully on a Tuesday morning, surrounded by her large family. Her death had been expected and was handled with all the dignity and respect that St. Catherine's provided for terminal patients. Rebecca had been off duty when Mrs. Chen passed away, but she had been saddened to learn of her death upon returning to work. Mrs. Chen had been in room 412, Rebecca explains. After her death, the room was cleaned and prepared for new patients, but it remained empty for about a week due to low census numbers. On a quiet Thursday night shift, Rebecca was making her rounds when she heard a familiar voice calling from room 412, "Nurse. Nurse, could I have some water, please?" The voice was soft and heavily accented, unmistakably Mrs. Chen's voice. I stopped dead in my tracks, Rebecca recalls. I knew Mrs. Chen had died, and I knew the room was empty. But that was definitely her voice, using the same polite tone she'd always used when making requests. Rebecca approached room 412 cautiously, unsure of what she might find. The room appeared empty, but the call light was activated, just as it would be if a patient were requesting assistance. I stood in the doorway and said, "Mrs. Chen, is that you?" Rebecca remembers, I felt foolish talking to an empty room, but something compelled me to respond as if she were really there. The response was immediate. "Yes, nurse. Could I please have some water? My mouth is very dry." Rebecca found herself in an unprecedented situation. Every aspect of her medical training told her that Mrs. Chen was dead and couldn't possibly be requesting water. But her nursing instincts compelled her to respond to a patient's request for comfort. I went to the kitchenette and got a cup of ice water, Rebecca says. I brought it back to room 412 and placed it on the bedside table where Mrs. Chen would have been able to reach it if she were lying in the bed. As soon as Rebecca placed the water on the table, she felt a subtle change in the atmosphere of the room. The oppressive feeling that had made the room uncomfortable seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace and gratitude. "Thank you, nurse. You are very kind," came Mrs. Chen's voice. Softer now, and seeming to come from farther away. Rebecca stayed in the room for several minutes, but Mrs. Chen didn't speak again. The call light had turned off automatically, and the room felt empty. In a way, it hadn't before. When I checked the room an hour later, the water cup was empty, Rebecca recalls. I don't know how to explain that scientifically, but the cup I had filled with ice water was completely dry. The incident with Mrs. Chen established a pattern that Rebecca would follow throughout her remaining years at St. Catherine's, when she encountered what seemed to be requests from deceased patients. She would respond with the same care and professionalism she provided to living patients. I started thinking of them as my continuing care patients, Rebecca explains. They were still in need of comfort and attention, even if their needs couldn't be addressed through conventional medical intervention. Rebecca's approach to the phantom patients was based on her understanding of hospice and palliative care principles. The goal wasn't to cure or treat medical conditions, but to provide comfort, dignity, and human connection to those who were suffering. Whether these spirits were objectively real or were manifestations of residual energy in the hospital, they seemed to respond to compassionate care, Rebecca says. Acknowledging their requests and treating them with respect seemed to bring them peace. Chapter 4. The pediatric tragedy. Rebecca's most heartbreaking encounter with the hospital's supernatural residents came during her 6th month at St. Catherine's. The ICU occasionally received pediatric patients when the children's hospital was at capacity or when a child required specialized adult equipment. We had admitted a 7-year-old boy named Danny following a severe asthma attack, Rebecca recalls, her voice heavy with emotion. He was in room 401 on a ventilator, and his condition was touch and go. His parents were staying at the hospital. Around the clock, Danny had been Rebecca's patient for 3 nights, and she had grown attached to the brave little boy who would try to communicate even with the ventilator tube preventing him from speaking. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Danny's condition deteriorated rapidly. Danny died on my 4th night caring for him, Rebecca says. It was one of the hardest deaths I'd experienced as a nurse. He was so young, and his parents were devastated. We all were. Danny's death occurred around 2 a.m., and the next few hours were spent helping the family say goodbye and completing the necessary procedures. Rebecca was emotionally drained, but had to continue caring for her other patients throughout the remainder of the shift. Room 401 was cleaned and left empty after Danny's death, Rebecca recalls. None of us could bear the thought of admitting another patient to that room so soon after losing such a young patient. 3 days after Danny's death, Rebecca was working another night shift when she heard sounds coming from room 401. Not the electronic malfunctions or core lights she had come to expect from rooms with supernatural activity, but the sound of a child crying. It was unmistakably a young boy sobbing, Rebecca says. Soft, scared, crying like a child who was lost and afraid. I knew immediately that it was Danny. Rebecca approached room 401 with a heavy heart, unsure of how to respond to the spirit of a child patient. When she entered the room, the crying stopped, but she could sense a presence, the same frightened energy that Danny had carried during his final days. "Danny, is that you, sweetheart?" Rebecca called softly into the empty room. "Nurse Rebecca," came a small, weak voice. "I'm scared. I don't know where my mummy and daddy are." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Rebecca's nursing career. She found herself trying to comfort a dead child who didn't understand what had happened to him. "I sat down in the chair beside where Danny's bed had been," Rebecca recalls. "I talked to him the same way I had when he was alive, using a gentle voice and simple words he could understand." Rebecca explained to Danny that he had been very sick and that his body couldn't get better, but that he wasn't in pain anymore. She told him that his parents loved him very much and that they would always remember him. Danny asked if he could see his parents. Rebecca remembers. "I told him that they weren't at the hospital anymore, but that someday he would be with them again. I tried to help him understand that he didn't need to be afraid." The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with Danny asking questions about his condition and expressing confusion about why he felt different. Rebecca answered as honestly as she could while trying to provide comfort and reassurance. Finally, Danny asked if I would stay with him until he wasn't scared anymore, Rebecca says. I promised him that I would, and I sat in that room for the rest of my shift, just talking to him softly and letting him know he wasn't alone. As dawn approached, Danny's presence seemed to fade. The last thing Rebecca heard was a whispered thank you, Nurse Rebecca, and then the room felt truly empty for the first time since his death. Danny never appeared in room 401 again, Rebecca recalls. I think he found a peace he needed to move on to whatever comes after death. But that experience taught me how traumatic death could be for patients who didn't understand what was happening to them. Rebecca's encounter with Danny's spirit reinforced her belief that the phantom patients at St. Catherine's weren't trying to haunt the living, but were confused souls seeking the same comfort and care they had needed while alive. Chapter 5. The Veterans Vid. During Rebecca's second year at St. Catherine's, she encountered a spirit who had become a regular presence in the ICU. Unlike the confused patients who appeared sporadically after their deaths, this spirit seemed to have a specific purpose and maintained a consistent routine. Room 418 had been occupied by Mr. Frank Morrison, a Korean War veteran in his 70s, Rebecca explains. He had been admitted with complications from diabetes and had spent several weeks in the ICU before passing away peacefully. Mr. Morrison had been a model, patient, polite, uncomplaining, and deeply respectful of the nursing staff. He had served as a medic during the war and understood the challenges of providing medical care under difficult circumstances. Mr. Morrison used to tell me stories about his time as a combat medic, Rebecca recalls. He'd talk about taking care of wounded soldiers in field hospitals, working with limited supplies and equipment. He said that nurses and medics had to look out for each other because they understood the burden of caring for others. After Mr. Morrison's death, room 418 began experiencing the familiar electronic anomalies that marked rooms with spiritual activity. But unlike other phantom patients, Mr. Morrison's presence seemed protective rather than needy. I started noticing that whenever I was having a particularly difficult shift, Mr. Morrison would make his presence known, Rebecca says. The call. Light in room 418 would flash, but not in the urgent pattern that indicated a patient emergency. It would flash slowly and steadily, like he was just letting me know he was there. Rebecca began to think of Mr. Morrison as her guardian angel on the night shift. During medical emergencies, she would sometimes catch a glimpse of a tall figure in the periphery of her vision, as if someone was standing nearby offering support. One night, I was trying to save a patient who was coding, Rebecca recalls. It was a chaotic situation with multiple staff members working to resuscitate a man who had gone into cardiac arrest. In the middle of the emergency, I heard Mr. Morrison's voice clearly. Check the 4-line, nurse. The medication isn't getting through. Following the advice, Rebecca discovered that the 4-line had become disconnected during the resuscitation efforts. The medications they were giving to restart the patient's heart weren't reaching his circulation. After reconnecting the line, the patient's heart rhythm returned to normal. I never mentioned hearing Mr. Morrison's voice to my colleagues, Rebecca says, but his advice saved that patient's life. Whether it was supernatural guidance or my subconscious mind working through medical knowledge I'd learned from Mr. Morrison, it made a crucial difference. Mr. Morrison's protective presence became a source of comfort for Rebecca during her most challenging shifts. When she felt overwhelmed or uncertain about a patient's care, she would sometimes sense his calming influence. I would talk to Mr. Morrison during quiet moments on the night shift, Rebecca admits. I'd tell him about difficult cases or ask for his opinion on patient care decisions. Sometimes I would hear his gentle voice offering advice, and sometimes I would just feel a sense of reassurance. Rebecca's relationship with Mr. Morrison's spirit was different from her encounters with other phantom patients. While most spirits seemed to need help moving on to whatever came after death, Mr. Morrison appeared to have chosen to remain in the ICU to continue his calling as a caregiver. Mr. Morrison had been a medic for most of his adult life, Rebecca explains, first in the military, then as a civilian EMT, and finally as a hospital volunteer. Caring for others was his identity, and death didn't seem to change that fundamental part of who he was. The presence of Mr. Morrison's protective spirit helped Rebecca feel less alone during the long night shifts at St. Catherine's. While other phantom patients required her care and attention, Mr. Morrison provided the support and guidance that helped her be a better nurse. Having Mr. Morrison watching over the ICU made the supernatural aspects of working at St. Catherine's feel less frightening. Rebecca reflects, "He reminded me that the spirits in the hospital had once been real people with real caring relationships, and that death didn't necessarily end their capacity for compassion." Chapter 6. The Suicide Patronaut. All of Rebecca's encounters with phantom patients involved individuals who had died from medical conditions. During her third year at St. Catherine's, she faced one of her most challenging cases, a spirit who had died by suicide and was trapped by feelings of guilt and despair. Jennifer Walsh was a 34-year-old woman who had been brought to the ICU after a suicide attempt. Rebecca recalls, she had overdosed on prescription medications and was in a coma for several days before her organs began to fail. Jennifer's case had been particularly difficult for the staff because she was close to many of the nurses in age and life circumstances. She had been struggling with depression following a divorce and job loss, circumstances that could have affected anyone. Jennifer died on a Sunday morning after her family made the difficult decision to withdraw life support, Rebecca says. It was a tragic situation made worse by the knowledge that her death could have been prevented if she had received appropriate mental health intervention. Room 415, where Jennifer had been treated, remained empty for several days after her death. But unlike other rooms with phantom patient activity, Room 415 felt oppressively sad rather than simply haunted. The atmosphere in Room 415 was different from other rooms with spiritual activity, Rebecca explains. Instead of the confused or peaceful energy I'd experienced from other phantom patients, Room 415 felt heavy with despair and self-recrimination. Rebecca's first encounter with Jennifer's spirit occurred about a week after her death. Instead of the typical cool light activation, Rebecca heard sobbing coming from Room 415, not the frightened crying of a confused patient, but the deep, anguished weeping of someone overwhelmed by emotional pain. I found Jennifer's spirit in a state of profound distress, Rebecca recalls. She was reliving the depression and hopelessness that had led to her suicide attempt, trapped in an endless loop of despair. Unlike other phantom patients who sought comfort or assistance with physical needs, Jennifer's spirit was tormented by psychological and spiritual anguish. She repeatedly expressed guilt about her suicide attempt and terror about what her death meant for her eternal fate. Jennifer kept asking if she was going to hell for what she had done, Rebecca says. She was caught between the relief of being free from physical pain and the fear that she had committed an unforgivable sin. Rebecca found herself providing a form of spiritual care that went beyond her medical training. She drew on her own faith background and her experience with grief, counseling to try to help Jennifer's troubled spirit. I told Jennifer that mental illness was a real medical condition, just like cancer or heart disease, Rebecca recalls. I explained that her suicide had been a symptom of her illness, not a reflection of her character or worth as a person. Over the course of several nights, Rebecca had long conversations with Jennifer's spirit, offering the compassion and understanding that Jennifer hadn't received during her lifetime struggle with depression. Jennifer needed to forgive herself before she could find peace, Rebecca explains. She had to understand that her death, while tragic, didn't define her entire existence or negate the love and kindness she had shown others during her life. The process of helping Jennifer's spirit find peace was emotionally exhausting for Rebecca. Night after night, she would spend hours in room 415, listening to Jennifer's anguish and trying to provide the therapeutic support that might free her from her spiritual prison. Finally, after about 2 weeks of these sessions, Jennifer's energy began to change, Rebecca recalls. She started talking about positive memories from her life and expressing hope that she might be able to find peace despite her tragic death. The last conversation Rebecca had with Jennifer's spirit focused on forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. Jennifer expressed gratitude for Rebecca's compassion and said she felt ready to go home. Jennifer's spirit left room 415 with a sense of peace that hadn't been there before, Rebecca says. The oppressive sadness that had made the room unbearable was replaced by a feeling of quiet acceptance. Jennifer's case taught Rebecca that phantom patients might be trapped not just by confusion about their deaths, but by unresolved emotional and spiritual issues that required therapeutic intervention. Some spirits needed medical comfort, while others needed psychological healing. Chapter 7. The Night Shift Community. As Rebecca's reputation for dealing with supernatural encounters spread among the St. Catherine's staff, she discovered that she wasn't alone in her experiences. Other night shift workers began sharing their own stories of phantom patients and unexplained phenomena throughout the hospital. Dr. Sarah Kim, one of the ICU residents, admitted that she had been seeing spirits for months but was afraid to mention it, Rebecca recalls. She thought it would damage her medical career if anyone knew she believed in ghosts. Dr. Kim had been encountering phantom patients in the emergency department, where she sometimes saw spirits of trauma victims who had died despite the medical team's efforts. Like Rebecca's ICU experiences, these spirits seemed to be seeking closure or comfort. Maria Santos, a respiratory therapist, told me about hearing patients calling for breathing treatments in rooms that were empty, Rebecca says. She had started responding to these phantom requests, checking equipment and adjusting settings as if the patients were still alive. The night shift custodial staff had their own encounters with the hospital's spiritual residents. They reported seeing figures in patient gowns walking the hallways, sometimes stopping to talk with cleaning staff as if they were still hospitalized. Carlos, the head custodian, said that spirits would sometimes ask him to clean their rooms or bring them fresh linens. Rebecca explains. He treated these requests with the same professionalism he brought to caring for living patients' environment needs. Rebecca realized that St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital had developed an informal community of living and dead patients, with staff members serving both populations without official acknowledgement of the supernatural aspect of their work. We started having unofficial discussions about how to handle phantom patient encounters, Rebecca says. We shared strategies for providing comfort to spirits while maintaining our professional responsibilities to living patients. The night shift staff developed protocols for dealing with phantom patients that mirrored their approaches to living patients with special needs. They would respond to spiritual requests with compassion, maintain professional boundaries, and document unusual incidents in ways that focused on patient care rather than supernatural phenomena. We couldn't officially acknowledge that we were caring for deceased patients, Rebecca explains, but we could document our responses to environmental disturbances and equipment anomalies in ways that reflected the high standard of care St. Catherine's expected from its staff. The informal support network among night shift staff made the supernatural aspects of working at St. Catherine's more manageable. Instead of feeling isolated and questioned by their experiences, staff members found colleagues who understood and validated their encounters with phantom patients. Having other healthcare professionals who shared similar experiences made me feel less alone, Rebecca reflects. We were all trying to maintain our scientific training while dealing with phenomena that challenged conventional medical understanding. The night shift community at St. Catherine's developed a unique culture that balanced skepticism and openness, professional responsibility and compassionate care. They were medical professionals who happened to work in a haunted hospital, and they found ways to serve both living and deceased patients with dignity and competence. We became experts at dual population patient care, Rebecca says with a slight smile. Living patients received evidence-based medical treatment, while phantom patients received comfort care designed to help them find peace and move on. The approach developed by the night shift staff at St. Catherine's represented an innovative model for dealing with paranormal phenomena in healthcare settings. Instead of denying or fighting the supernatural encounters, they integrated spirit care into their broader mission of providing compassionate medical services. Chapter 8. The Terminal Ward during Rebecca's 4th year at St. Catherine's. The hospital opened a new terminal care unit on the 5th floor, designed to provide specialized palliative and hospice services. Rebecca volunteered to work occasional shifts in the terminal ward, believing her experience with phantom patients might be valuable in a unit focused on end-of-life care. The terminal ward was designed to be as comfortable and peaceful as possible, Rebecca explains. Soft lighting, home-like furnishings, and policies that encouraged families to spend unlimited time with dying loved ones. But the concentration of terminal patients in a single unit created an intense spiritual atmosphere that went beyond anything Rebecca had experienced in the ICU. The terminal ward became a nexus of supernatural activity that challenged even her expanded understanding of phantom patient care. Within weeks of opening, the terminal ward was experiencing massive spiritual phenomena, Rebecca recalls. Multiple phantom patients in every room, spirits appearing to comfort dying patients, and what seemed like a complex supernatural community. Rebecca's first shift in the terminal ward revealed that dying patients were often aware of spiritual presences that living staff couldn't see. Patients would have conversations with deceased relatives, report visits from loved ones who had died years earlier, and describe seeing other patients who were clearly not physically present. Mrs. Rodriguez, who was dying of pancreatic cancer, introduced me to her deceased husband, who she said was sitting in the chair beside her bed. Rebecca says she talked to him throughout the night, and he seemed to be providing her with comfort and reassurance. Rebecca learned to acknowledge these spiritual encounters as part of the dying process, neither dismissing them as hallucinations nor becoming alarmed by their frequency. Terminal patients seemed to exist in a state between life and death that allowed them to perceive spirits more clearly than healthy individuals. The terminal ward taught me that the boundary between life and death isn't a sharp line, Rebecca explains. It's more like a gradual transition, and patients who are dying often begin to experience the spiritual realm before they physically pass away. The phantom patients in the terminal ward seemed different from those Rebecca had encountered in the ICU, instead of confused spirits seeking help. The terminal ward hosted spirits who appeared to be serving as guides and comforters for dying patients. I saw deceased patients helping newly dying patients understand what was happening to them, Rebecca recalls. Former terminal ward patients would appear to current patients, explaining the dying process and offering reassurance about what came. Next, the spiritual activity in the terminal ward was so intense that it began affecting the living staff. Nurses reported feeling the presence of multiple spirits during their shifts, sensing emotions that weren't their own, and occasionally receiving guidance about patient care from phantom patients. Dr. Martinez, the terminal ward physician, admitted that he sometimes received medical insights from patients who had died under his care, Rebecca says. Former patients would appear to warn him about complications in current patients or suggest comfort measures that proved effective. The terminal ward's spiritual environment created unique challenges for providing medical care. Staff had to balance attention to living patients with acknowledgement of spiritual presences that seemed to be part of the healing and dying process. We developed new approaches to patient care that incorporated spiritual as well as medical needs. Rebecca explains, "We learned to work around phantom patients who were comforting dying relatives, and we began to see spirit guides as part of the therapeutic team." The success of the terminal ward, measured by patient and family satisfaction rather than cure rates, suggested that acknowledging spiritual dimensions of healthcare could improve outcomes for terminal patients. Families reported that their loved ones seemed more peaceful and less frightened about dying when they were in the terminal ward, Rebecca says. The presence of spiritual guides and phantom patients appeared to provide comfort that medical intervention alone couldn't offer. Rebecca's experience in the terminal ward expanded her understanding of phantom patient care, beyond simple compassion for confused spirits to recognition of an entire spiritual ecosystem that existed within the hospital walls. Chapter 9. The investigation in Rebecca's 5th year at St. Catherine's. The unusual phenomena at the hospital attracted the attention of researchers studying paranormal activity in healthcare settings. Dr. Michael Thompson, a psychiatrist specializing in anomalous experiences, requested permission to conduct a formal investigation of the reported supernatural incidents. Dr. Thompson approached the hospital administration with a proposal to study what he called environmental psychology factors affecting patient care, Rebecca recalls. He was careful not to use words like paranormal or supernatural in his official research proposal, but his real interest was in documenting and understanding the spiritual phenomena that staff had been reporting. The hospital administration, concerned about staff turnover rates and the reputation issues surrounding St. Catherine's, approved Dr. Thompson's study. They hoped that a scientific investigation might either debunk the ghost stories or provide strategies for managing whatever was causing staff distress. Dr. Thompson interviewed dozens of staff members, including me, Rebecca says. He used standardized psychological assessment tools to evaluate our mental health and reality testing, wanting to rule out hallucinations or stress-related disorders. The results of Dr. Thompson's psychological evaluations surprised him. The staff members reporting supernatural encounters showed no signs of mental illness, substance abuse, or reality distortion. They were psychologically healthy individuals describing experiences that seemed impossible but were remarkably consistent across different witnesses. Dr. Thompson installed recording equipment throughout the hospital, Rebecca explains. Audio recorders, video cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and temperature monitors in rooms where phantom patient activity had been reported. The technological investigation produced intriguing but inconclusive results. Electronic equipment frequently malfunctioned in rooms with reported supernatural activity, but the malfunctions followed patterns that suggested interference rather than random technical failures. Temperature drops were recorded in several rooms at times when staff reported phantom patient encounters. Rebecca says, the drops were localized to specific areas of rooms and lasted for precise durations that corresponded to the length of reported spiritual interactions. Audio recordings captured voices and sounds that had no identifiable source among living patients or staff. The recordings included requests for water, medication, and comfort that matched the phantom patient. Encounters staff had described. Dr. Thompson played some of the audio recordings for me. Rebecca recalls, I recognized several voices, including Mrs. Chen asking for water and Mr. Morrison offering medical advice during an emergency. Video recordings showed unexplained shadows and light anomalies in rooms where phantom patients had been reported, but never captured clear images of spirits or apparitions. The visual evidence suggested that something unusual was occurring, but didn't provide definitive proof of supernatural activity. Dr. Thompson's investigation validated our experiences without explaining them, Rebecca explains. He confirmed that unusual phenomena were occurring at St. Catherine's, but he couldn't determine whether the causes were paranormal, psychological, or some combination of both. The study's findings led to changes in hospital policies regarding staff reports of unusual incidents. Instead of dismissing supernatural encounters as signs of stress or mental health problems, the administration began treating them as legitimate workplace challenges that required management strategies. The hospital implemented support groups for staff dealing with unusual patient encounters, Rebecca says. They also revised incident reporting procedures to allow documentation of anomalous events without requiring staff to claim they were supernatural occurrences. Dr. Thompson's research was eventually published in a medical journal as a case study of environmental factors affecting healthcare worker performance. While the published version avoided explicit discussion of paranormal phenomena, it provided a framework for understanding and managing unusual incidents in hospital settings. The study helped legitimize our experiences, Rebecca reflects. We were no longer seen as unstable staff members making up ghost stories, but as healthcare professionals dealing with complex environmental challenges that affected our ability to provide patient care. Chapter 10. The Child's Ward. The most emotionally challenging aspect of Rebecca's work at St. Catherine's involved encounters with the spirits of children who had died in the hospital. The pediatric wing, located on the second floor, had its own unique spiritual atmosphere that differed significantly from the adult units. Children who died at St. Catherine's seemed to become confused differently than adult patients, Rebecca explains. Instead of being trapped by medical needs or unfinished business, pediatric spirits often seemed to be looking for their parents or trying to continue playing. Rebecca's first encounter with a child spirit occurred when she was asked to float to the pediatric unit during a staffing shortage. 80-year-old Amanda Chen had died from leukemia complications, and her room had been experiencing the familiar signs of phantom patient activity. I heard Amanda calling for her mummy, Rebecca recalls. It was heartbreaking. She sounded scared and confused, not understanding why her mother wasn't coming when she called. Rebecca approached Amanda's spirit with the same gentle manner she would use with any frightened child patient. She sat in the empty room and talked to Amanda in soothing tones, explaining that her mother loved her very much but couldn't visit right now. Amanda asked if she could go home, Rebecca says. I told her that she would be going to a special home where she wouldn't be sick anymore, and that someday she would see her family again. The conversation with Amanda lasted nearly 2 hours, with Rebecca providing the same comfort and reassurance she would offer to any scared child. By the end of their interaction, Amanda's presence felt more peaceful, and she stopped calling. For her mother, the pediatric spirits were different from adult phantom patients. Rebecca explains, they needed different kinds of comfort, less medical care, and more emotional nurturing. Rebecca began volunteering regularly in the pediatric wing, developing specialized approaches for caring for child spirits. She would read stories aloud to empty rooms where child spirits lingered, play gentle music, and provide the kind of comfort that frightened children needed. There was a playroom on the pediatric wing where several child spirits would gather, Rebecca recalls. I would sometimes spend my breaks in that room, just talking to them and letting them know they weren't alone. The child spirits seemed to respond particularly well to Rebecca's presence, perhaps because she approached them with maternal instincts rather than just medical training. They would tell her about their fears, ask questions about death, and seek reassurance about their families. One little boy named Marcus had died from injuries sustained in a car accident, Rebecca says. He was worried about his dog and kept asking if someone would take care of his pet. I was able to contact his family and confirm that the dog was being cared for by relatives. Providing comfort to child spirits required Rebecca to address fears and concerns that went beyond medical needs. The children worried about pets, toys left behind, and whether their parents would be sad without them. I became a liaison between the living and dead members of families, Rebecca explains. I would pass along messages from child spirits to their parents, always framing them as dreams or intuitions rather than supernatural communications. The work with pediatric spirits was emotionally draining but deeply meaningful for Rebecca. She felt privileged to provide comfort to children who had died far too young and to help families process their grief. The child spirits taught me about resilience and hope, Rebecca reflects. Even in death, these children maintained curiosity about the world and love for their families. They reminded me why I had chosen to become a nurse in the first place. Rebecca's success in helping child spirits find peace led to her being informally designated as the staff member who handled pediatric phantom patient encounters. Other nurses would call her when they experienced supernatural activity in the children's wing. I developed a reputation as someone who could help a troubled child. Spirits move on, Rebecca says. It wasn't a role I had sought, but it became one of the most important aspects of my work at St. Catherine's. Chapter 11. The Administrator's Dilemma during Rebecca's 6th year at St. Catherine's. The hospital's supernatural reputation began affecting its operations in ways that could no longer be ignored by administration. Staff turnover remained high. Patients occasionally requested transfers due to uncomfortable feelings, and the hospital's insurance rates were impacted by unexplained incident reports. Hospital Administrator Janet Walsh called a meeting with senior staff to discuss what she euphemistically called environmental challenges, Rebecca recalls. She never used the word ghosts, but everyone knew what we were really discussing. Janet Walsh faced a complex dilemma. The supernatural phenomena at St. Catherine's were affecting hospital operations and staff morale, but officially acknowledging paranormal activity would create legal, financial, and public relations disasters. Ms. Walsh asked us to develop practical strategies for managing unusual incidents without admitting that the hospital was haunted. Rebecca explains, we needed to maintain our professional credibility while addressing very real operational challenges. The senior staff developed a comprehensive approach that treated phantom patient encounters as a form of environmental psychology that affected workplace performance. They created protocols that allowed staff to document and respond to supernatural incidents without officially recognizing them as paranormal phenomena. We established a special patient services program, Rebecca says. Staff members who had experience with phantom patient care were designated as specialists who could be called in when unusual situations arose. Rebecca became the lead special patient services coordinator, officially responsible for managing complex environmental patient care situations. Her role allowed her to respond openly to phantom patient encounters while maintaining plausible professional cover. The Special Patient Services Program gave us a framework for providing spiritual care without admitting that we were dealing with ghosts, Rebecca explains. We could document our interventions as environmental comfort measures or atmospheric patient support. The program included training sessions where experienced staff members shared strategies for managing unusual patient encounters. New employees learned about St. Catherine's unique challenges without being told explicitly that they might encounter deceased patients. We taught new staff to respond compassionately to any patient requests, regardless of whether they could identify the source of the request, Rebecca says. If someone heard a call for help, they should respond professionally and document the incident appropriately. The Special Patient Services approach proved effective at managing both supernatural phenomena and staff anxiety about paranormal encounters. Staff members felt supported rather than isolated when they experienced phantom patient interactions. Employee satisfaction scores improved after we implemented the Special Patient Services Program, Rebecca recalls. Staff members felt more confident about handling unusual situations, and turnover rates began to decrease. The hospital administration was pleased that they had found a way to address supernatural challenges without officially acknowledging paranormal activity. Patient satisfaction scores remained high, and the hospital's reputation stabilized. Ms. Walsh never admitted that St. Catherine's was haunted, Rebecca says, but she clearly understood that we were dealing with unusual phenomena that required creative management strategies. The success of the Special Patient Services program attracted attention from other hospitals experiencing similar challenges. Rebecca began consulting with healthcare facilities across the region, sharing strategies for managing phantom patient encounters. I discovered that St. Catherine's wasn't unique, Rebecca explains. Many hospitals, especially older facilities, had staff members who reported supernatural encounters. Most institutions were just less organized about addressing the phenomena. Rebecca's consulting work helped establish best practices for managing paranormal activity in healthcare settings. Her approaches emphasized compassionate care, professional documentation, and support for staff members who experienced unusual incidents. The goal was always to maintain high standards of medical care, while acknowledging that hospitals are places where life and death intersect in complex ways. Rebecca reflects, some hospitals have spiritual dimensions that require specialized management approaches. Chapter 12. The final cases as Rebecca entered her 7th year at St. Catherine's. She encountered several phantom patients whose cases would define her understanding of spiritual care and ultimately influence her decision to leave nursing. These final encounters represented the most complex and emotionally challenging aspects of her work with hospital spirits. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman was a 45-year-old physician who had died from complications following emergency surgery. Rebecca recalls she had been a respected member of the St. Catherine's medical staff, and her unexpected death had devastated her colleagues. Dr. Hartman's spirit presented unique challenges because she retained her medical knowledge and professional identity after death. Instead of seeking comfort, like other phantom patients, Dr. Hartman continued trying to provide medical care to living patients. I would find Dr. Hartman's spirit in patient rooms, attempting to examine patients and provide medical advice, Rebecca explains. She couldn't accept that her death had ended her medical career, and she was frustrated by her inability to physically interact with patients and equipment. Rebecca spent weeks trying to help Dr. Hartman understand her situation and find peace. With her death, the conversations were complicated by Dr. Hartman's medical expertise and her professional dedication to patient care. Dr. Hartman kept insisting that she had patients who needed her attention. Rebecca says, she was trapped by her sense of medical responsibility, just as some other phantom patients were trapped by physical needs or emotional issues. Eventually, Rebecca was able to help Dr. Hartman recognize that her medical colleagues were providing excellent care to her former patients. Dr. Hartman's spirit gradually accepted that her earthly medical mission was complete, and that she could trust other physicians to continue her work. Dr. Hartman's case taught me that phantom patients could be trapped by professional identities as well as personal attachments, Rebecca reflects. Some spirits needed help letting go of their careers and responsibilities, not just their physical lives. Another challenging case involved Robert Kim, a 28-year-old man who had died from injuries sustained in a motorcycle accident. Robert's spirit was angry about his death and expressed hostility toward the medical staff who had been unable to save him. Robert's phantom patient encounters were aggressive rather than pleading, Rebecca recalls. He would cause equipment malfunctions during critical procedures, apparently trying to disrupt medical care out of resentment about his own treatment. Rebecca approached Robert's hostile spirit with the same compassion she brought to all phantom patient care, but his anger made communication difficult. He blamed the medical team for his death and wanted revenge rather than comfort. I spent hours talking to Robert about his accident and his feelings about dying young, Rebecca says. Gradually, he began to understand that his death hadn't been caused by medical malpractice, but by the severity of his injuries. Robert's case required Rebecca to provide a form of grief counseling to help him process his own death. He needed to work through anger and denial before he could find acceptance and peace. Robert eventually apologized for disrupting medical procedures, Rebecca recalls. He realized that his anger was hurting innocent patients and staff members who were trying to help others avoid his fate. The final case that influenced Rebecca's decision to leave St. Catherine's involved Maria Gonzalez, a 16-year-old girl who had died from complications of anorexia nervosa. Maria's spirit was trapped by the same distorted self-image that had contributed to her eating disorder. Maria's phantom patient encounters involved obsessive behaviors around food and body image, Rebecca explains. She would interfere with feeding tubes and for nutrition for other patients, apparently trying to prevent them from receiving calories. Rebecca recognized that Maria's spirit needed specialized psychological intervention that went beyond general phantom patient care. Her eating disorder had followed her into death, creating a spiritual condition that required therapeutic expertise Rebecca didn't possess. Maria's case made me realize that some phantom patients needed more help than I could provide with compassionate nursing care, Rebecca says. She needed a specialist in eating disorders who could address the psychological issues that were keeping her earthbound. Rebecca consulted with Dr. Thompson, the researcher who had studied St. Catherine's supernatural phenomena, about Maria's case. Together, they developed a treatment approach that combined phantom patient care with specialized therapy for eating disorders. Working with Maria required me to expand my role beyond nursing into areas where I wasn't qualified, Rebecca explains. I began to question whether I was providing appropriate care or potentially causing harm. By attempting interventions outside my expertise, Maria's case was eventually resolved through a combination of spiritual care and therapeutic intervention. But the experience left Rebecca feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of phantom patient needs. I realized that caring for spirits required specialized training that I hadn't received in nursing school. Rebecca reflects. I was making up my approaches as I went along, and some phantom patients needed more expertise than I could offer. Chapter 13. The burnout by her 8th year at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital. Rebecca was experiencing a form of professional burnout unlike anything described in nursing literature. While her colleagues dealt with the emotional toll of caring for living patients, Rebecca carried the additional burden of providing spiritual care to deceased patients who couldn't find peace. I was caring for 2 patient populations, the living and the dead, Rebecca explains. The living patients had families, medical teams, and discharge planning. The phantom patients had only me, and their needs seemed endless. Rebecca's case of phantom patients had grown to include dozens of spirits who appeared regularly in the hospital. She knew their names, their stories, and their specific spiritual needs. Each shift involved balancing medical care for living patients with comfort, care for deceased patients. I would arrive at work knowing that Mrs. Chen might need water, that Danny might be frightened and looking for his parents, and that Mr. Morrison might have advice about a difficult medical case, Rebecca recalls. The phantom patients had become as real to me as the living patients, and equally demanding of my attention. The emotional toll of caring for phantom patients was compounded by the isolation Rebecca felt from colleagues who didn't share her sensitivity to spiritual phenomena. While other staff members occasionally encountered phantom patients, Rebecca was the primary caregiver for the hospital's spiritual population. I felt responsible for every spirit in the hospital, Rebecca says. If a phantom patient was suffering or confused, I believed it was my duty to help them find peace. But there were more spirits than I could possibly care for adequately. Rebecca began experiencing symptoms of compassion fatigue that extended beyond typical nursing burnout. She was emotionally exhausted from providing care to patients whose needs couldn't be fully resolved through conventional intervention. Living patients could be discharged when their medical conditions improved, Rebecca explains. But phantom patients might linger indefinitely, requiring ongoing spiritual support that I wasn't trained to provide effectively. Rebecca's personal life began suffering as she struggled to separate her work with phantom patients from her time at home. She would lie awake at night, worrying about spirits she hadn't been able to help, and she began experiencing anxiety about returning to work. I started having dreams about phantom patients, Rebecca recalls. They would visit me at home, asking for help that I couldn't provide. The boundary between work and personal life disappeared completely. Rebecca's family and friends noticed changes in her behavior and emotional state. She became withdrawn, preoccupied with her work at St. Catherine's, and reluctant to discuss the challenges she was facing. How do you explain to people that you're burned out from caring for ghosts? Rebecca asks. My family thought I was having a breakdown, and maybe I was. I couldn't continue providing spiritual care to an unlimited number of phantom patients. Rebecca sought counseling through the hospital's employee assistance program, but the counselor had no framework for understanding burnout caused by supernatural patient care. Traditional therapy approaches weren't designed to address the unique stresses of phantom patient work. I was dealing with a form of professional exhaustion that didn't exist in any textbook, Rebecca explains. I needed support from someone who understood both nursing burnout and spiritual care challenges. Rebecca eventually contacted Dr. Thompson, the researcher who had studied St. Catherine's supernatural phenomena. He had continued his research into paranormal healthcare encounters and had worked with other medical professionals facing similar challenges. Dr. Thompson helped me understand that phantom patient burnout was a real condition that affected sensitive healthcare workers in spiritually active facilities, Rebecca says. He validated my experiences and helped me develop coping strategies. Dr. Thompson's guidance helped Rebecca recognize that she needed to establish boundaries with phantom patients, just as she maintained professional boundaries with living patients. She couldn't be personally responsible for resolving every spiritual problem in the hospital. I learned that saying no to phantom patients was as important as saying no to excessive demands from living patients, Rebecca reflects. I had to prioritize the spiritual care I could provide effectively rather than attempting to help every confused spirit in the hospital. But even with improved coping strategies, Rebecca realized that the spiritual demands of working at St. Catherine's were incompatible with her long-term mental health and career sustainability. Chapter 14. The decision to leave during Rebecca's 9th and final year at St. Catherine's. Several factors converged to convince her that she needed to leave the hospital and potentially the nursing profession entirely. The decision was emotionally difficult, but professionally necessary for her psychological well-being. The hospital announced plans to close St. Catherine's within 2 years due to financial pressures, Rebecca recalls. The aging facility, high maintenance costs, and declining patient census made the hospital unsustainable from a business perspective. The announcement of St. Catherine's closure created additional challenges for phantom patient care. Rebecca worried about what would happen to the hospital's spiritual residents when the building was demolished or converted to another use. I couldn't stop thinking about the phantom patients who would be left homeless when St. Catherine's closed. Rebecca says, would they be able to move on, or would they remain trapped in the demolished building's spiritual residue? Rebecca's concerns about the phantom patient's fate after closure revealed how emotionally invested she had become in their welfare. She realized that her attachment to the spirits was unhealthy and was preventing her from maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. I was more worried about the phantom patients than about my own career prospects, Rebecca admits. That's when I knew my relationship with the supernatural aspects of my work had become problematic. Rebecca also faced practical considerations about her nursing career. Her experience at St. Catherine's had specialized her in a form of patient care that didn't exist at other hospitals. Her skills in phantom patient management weren't transferable to facilities without supernatural activity. I had become an expert in a field that officially didn't exist, Rebecca explains. Other hospitals weren't looking for nurses with ghost management skills. My specialized experience at St. Catherine's had actually limited my career options. Rebecca began exploring alternative career paths that would allow her to use her healthcare background without requiring direct patient care. She was drawn to medical administration, where she could contribute to healthcare delivery without the emotional demands of nursing. I realized that I could have a greater impact on healthcare by working in administration than by continuing as a bedside nurse, Rebecca says. Administrative roles would allow me to improve systems and policies that affected many patients rather than focusing on individual patient care. Rebecca's decision to leave nursing was also influenced by her recognition that she needed psychological distance from the supernatural encounters that had defined her career at St. Catherine's. She required time to process her experiences and develop healthier perspectives on her work. I needed to rediscover who I was as a person, separate from my role as a phantom patient caregiver, Rebecca reflects. My identity had become so wrapped up in spiritual care that I'd lost sight of my own needs and boundaries. Rebecca's final months at St. Catherine's involved transitioning her phantom patient, responsibilities to other staff members, and documenting her approaches to spiritual care for future reference. She wanted to ensure that the hospital's remaining spirits would continue receiving appropriate attention. I created detailed protocols for phantom patient care and trained several colleagues in spiritual comfort techniques. Rebecca explains, I couldn't abandon the phantom patients completely, but I could ensure that others were prepared to continue their care. Rebecca's departure from St. Catherine's was emotionally complex. She felt relief at escaping the overwhelming demands of phantom patient care, but also guilt about leaving spirits who depended on her assistance. The phantom patients had become like family to me, Rebecca says. Leaving them felt like abandoning vulnerable individuals who trusted me for their care and comfort. But Rebecca recognized that her decision to leave was necessary for her mental health and professional survival. She couldn't continue providing spiritual care at the expense of her own well-being. I had to choose between my responsibility to phantom patients and my responsibility to myself, Rebecca reflects. It was the most difficult professional decision I've ever made, but it was the right choice for everyone involved. Chapter 15, Life. After St. Catherine's, Rebecca's transition from nursing to medical administration required significant adjustment as she adapted to a career that didn't involve direct patient care or supernatural encounters. Her new role at a large healthcare system in Phoenix, Arizona, provided the psychological distance she needed to process her experiences at St. Catherine's. Moving across the country was part of my recovery strategy, Rebecca explains. I needed to be somewhere with no connection to St. Catherine's or phantom patient care. Phoenix represented a completely fresh start. Rebecca's new position as a healthcare quality improvement specialist allowed her to use her clinical knowledge while focusing on systems and processes rather than individual patient relationships. The work was intellectually stimulating, but emotionally less demanding than bedside nursing. I found satisfaction in improving healthcare delivery through policy changes and quality initiatives, Rebecca says. I could positively impact thousands of patients without becoming personally involved in their care. Rebecca's experience with phantom patient care proved unexpectedly valuable in her administrative role. Her sensitivity to environmental factors affecting patient experience helped her identify subtle issues that other administrators might overlook. I could sense when hospitals had problems with staff morale or patient dissatisfaction, Rebecca explains. My years of paying attention to atmospheric conditions and environmental psychology gave me insights that improved my effectiveness as an administrator. Rebecca initially avoided discussing her supernatural experiences at St. Catherine's with her new colleagues. She feared that admitting to ghost encounters would damage her professional credibility in a more conventional healthcare environment. I presented my background as specialized experience in environmental patient care and complex psychosocial nursing, Rebecca says. It was technically accurate while avoiding explicit discussion of paranormal phenomena. Over time, Rebecca began sharing selected aspects of her St. Catherine's experiences with trusted colleagues who expressed interest in unusual patient care challenges. She was surprised to find that many healthcare professionals had their own stories of unexplained phenomena. I discovered that supernatural encounters were more common in healthcare settings than most people admitted, Rebecca reflects. Nurses, doctors, and other staff members had experienced unexplained phenomena but rarely discussed them openly. Rebecca's willingness to discuss paranormal healthcare encounters led to informal consulting opportunities with facilities experiencing unusual staff reports or patient complaints. She developed expertise in managing supernatural phenomena without officially acknowledging paranormal activity. I helped several hospitals develop policies for handling unusual incident reports and supporting staff members who experienced unexplained phenomena, Rebecca explains. The approaches I'd learned at St. Catherine's proved applicable to other healthcare settings. Rebecca's consulting work evolved into a specialized practice focused on environmental psychology in healthcare facilities. She provided training, policy development, and crisis intervention for hospitals dealing with supernatural challenges. I found a way to continue helping phantom patients indirectly by improving healthcare systems' ability to manage paranormal encounters. Rebecca says, instead of caring for individual spirits, I was helping entire institutions develop more effective approaches to supernatural phenomena. Rebecca's personal life also stabilized after leaving direct patient care. The psychological distance from phantom patients allowed her to develop healthier relationships and engage in activities unrelated to supernatural phenomena. I was able to rediscover interests and hobbies that I'd neglected during my years of intensive spiritual care. Rebecca recalls, I started hiking, took art classes, and began dating again. I remembered who I was outside of my role as a phantom patient caregiver. Rebecca eventually married a fellow healthcare administrator who understood the demands of medical work but had no experience with paranormal phenomena. Their relationship provided her with emotional support while maintaining healthy boundaries around her supernatural experiences. My husband knows about my background with phantom patient care, but it's not the focus of our relationship, Rebecca explains. He's supportive of my work, but helps me maintain perspective about the importance of normal life experiences. Rebecca's success in medical administration demonstrated that her skills and experience were valuable beyond the specialized environment of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital. She had found a career path that utilized her healthcare background while protecting her mental health. Chapter 16. The hospital's closure in 2010. St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital officially closed its doors after 86 years of serving the community. Rebecca followed the closure process from her new home in Phoenix, maintaining contact with former colleagues and feeling conflicted about the institution's fate. The closure was emotionally difficult for everyone who had worked at St. Catherine's, Rebecca recalls. We all knew the hospital had problems, but it had been our professional home and the site of meaningful relationships with patients and colleagues. Rebecca was particularly concerned about the impact of closure on the hospital's phantom patient population. She wondered whether the spirits who had found comfort and care at St. Catherine's would be displaced by the building's decommission. I worried that the phantom patients would become homeless when St. Catherine's closed, Rebecca admits. They had established routines and relationships within the hospital environment. What would happen to them when that environment no longer existed? Rebecca contacted Dr. Thompson, the researcher who had studied St. Catherine's supernatural phenomena, to discuss the potential effects of hospital closure on paranormal activity. His research suggested that spiritual attachments to buildings could persist even after demolition. Dr. Thompson explained that phantom patients might remain attached to the physical location even if the hospital building was destroyed. Rebecca says, spirits often bond to places where they experienced significant events, and those bonds can survive structural changes. Rebecca's former colleagues reported that supernatural activity at St. Catherine's intensified during the final months. Before closure, phantom patient encounters became more frequent and more dramatic, as if the spirits were responding to the impending loss of their environment. The phantom patients seemed to sense that something was changing. Rebecca explains. Staff members reported increased spiritual activity, more desperate phantom requests, and spirits appearing in areas where they'd never been seen before. Rebecca arranged to visit St. Catherine's during its final week of operation, wanting to say goodbye to the institution that had shaped her nursing career and to check on the phantom patients, who had been such an important part of her professional experience. Walking through St. Catherine's during its final days was surreal, Rebecca recalls. The building felt empty in ways that went beyond the absence of living patients. The spiritual energy that had defined the hospital for so many years seemed to be dissipating. Rebecca spent several hours in the ICU, visiting rooms where she had cared for both living and phantom patients. She spoke aloud to the spirits she had known, thanking them for the lessons they had taught her, and hoping they would find peace after the hospital's closure. I told the phantom patients that the hospital was closing, but that they didn't need to remain trapped in the building, Rebecca says. I encouraged them to let go of their earthly attachments and move on to whatever came next. Rebecca's visit to the ICU during closure week provided a sense of completion for her work with phantom patients. She felt that she was officially ending her role as their caregiver and giving them permission to continue their spiritual journeys independently. Several former colleagues told me they had experienced unusual phenomena during my visit, Rebecca recalls. Call lights activating in rooms where I'd spoken to phantom patients, temperature fluctuations, and what sounded like voices saying, "Goodbye." The actual demolition of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital took place 6 months after closure, with the building being razed to make room for commercial development. Rebecca watched news coverage of the demolition from her home in Phoenix, feeling both sadness and relief. Seeing St. Catherine's being demolished was like watching the end of an era, Rebecca reflects. The building had been a place of healing, death, and supernatural encounter. Its destruction represented the end of a unique chapter in healthcare history. Rebecca never learned definitively what happened to St. Catherine's Phantom. Patients after the hospital's closure and demolition, she chose to believe that the end of the hospital had freed them to continue their spiritual journeys, rather than trapping them in the rubble of their former home. I hope that the phantom patients found the peace in death that the hospital's closure represented, Rebecca says. Maybe they finally understood that their earthly attachments were complete and they could move on to whatever comes after life. The site of St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital is now occupied by a shopping centre, with no visible trace of the medical facility that once served the community for nearly 9 decades. Rebecca occasionally wonders whether sensitive individuals shopping there might sense residual spiritual energy from the hospital's former presence. Chapter 17. The Legacy. More than a decade after leaving St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital, Rebecca has established herself as a recognized expert in healthcare, environmental psychology, and paranormal facility management. Her unique background in phantom patient care has led to consulting opportunities, research collaborations, and speaking engagements across the healthcare industry. I've worked with over 50 hospitals that were experiencing what they called unusual staff reports, Rebecca explains. In every case, the issues involved supernatural phenomena that administrators were reluctant to acknowledge officially. Rebecca's consulting practice focuses on helping healthcare facilities develop policies and procedures for managing paranormal encounters, while maintaining professional credibility and operational efficiency. Her approaches balance skepticism with openness, acknowledging spiritual phenomena without endorsing supernatural explanations. The goal is always to support staff members who experience unusual phenomena while maintaining the facility's reputation for scientific medical care. Rebecca says, "Healthcare workers need to feel validated and supported, regardless of whether their experiences have supernatural or psychological explanations." Rebecca has developed training programs that prepare healthcare workers to respond professionally to unexplained incidents without requiring belief in paranormal phenomena. The training emphasizes compassionate patient care, thorough documentation, and appropriate professional boundaries. Staff members learn to respond to any patient request with professionalism and compassion. Whether the request comes from a living patient or appears to have a supernatural source, Rebecca explains. The focus is on providing excellent customer service rather than determining the reality of paranormal encounters. Rebecca's work has contributed to a growing recognition within the healthcare industry that spiritual dimensions of patient care deserve attention and respect. Several major hospital systems have implemented policies based on her recommendations for managing unusual phenomena. Healthcare facilities are beginning to acknowledge that patients' spiritual needs are as important as their medical needs. Rebecca reflects, whether those needs are expressed by living patients or through paranormal phenomena, they deserve professional attention. Rebecca has also collaborated with researchers studying consciousness, near-death experiences, and anomalous phenomena in medical settings. Her practical experience with phantom patients provides valuable insights for scientists investigating the relationship between mind and mortality. "My work bridges the gap between clinical healthcare practice and consciousness research," Rebecca says. "I can translate theoretical concepts about post-mortem consciousness into practical strategies for healthcare delivery." Rebecca's expertise has been featured in medical journals, healthcare management publications, and documentaries about paranormal phenomena in institutional settings. She has become a spokesperson for healthcare professionals who encounter unexplained phenomena in their work. "I try to help healthcare workers understand that supernatural experiences don't diminish their professionalism or competence," Rebecca explains. "Many excellent medical professionals have encountered unexplained phenomena, and those experiences can actually enhance their sensitivity to patient needs." Rebecca's daughter, now in college, is studying psychology with an interest in medical applications. She has been influenced by her mother's work with phantom patients and hopes to contribute to research on consciousness and healthcare. "My daughter wants to study the psychological aspects of supernatural healthcare encounters," Rebecca says. She's interested in understanding how paranormal experiences affect healthcare workers and patients, regardless of whether the experiences represent actual contact with spirits. Rebecca's influence extends beyond healthcare settings to other institutions where workers report supernatural encounters. Schools, prisons, hotels, and historical sites have consulted with her about managing paranormal phenomena while maintaining operational effectiveness. The principles of phantom patient care apply to any institutional setting where people report spiritual encounters. Rebecca explains, "The key is always to respond with compassion and professionalism while maintaining appropriate boundaries." Rebecca continues to receive reports from former colleagues about paranormal activity at their new healthcare facilities, suggesting that sensitivity to spiritual phenomena may be an acquired skill that follows healthcare workers throughout their careers. Once you develop awareness of spiritual dimensions in healthcare settings, you tend to notice them wherever you work, Rebecca reflects. Many of my former colleagues have become informal spiritual care specialists at their new hospitals. Chapter 18. Reflections on Supernatural Healthcare. As Rebecca approaches her 50s, she continues to work in healthcare administration while maintaining her consulting practice in paranormal facility management. Her unique career path has given her perspectives on healthcare, spirituality, and human consciousness that inform both her professional work and personal worldview. Working with phantom patients taught me that healthcare involves more than treating physical symptoms, Rebecca reflects. Patients are whole persons with spiritual as well as medical needs, and those needs don't necessarily end when biological life ends. Rebecca's experience has convinced her that consciousness may survive bodily death in ways that medical science doesn't yet understand. While she doesn't claim certainty about the existence of an afterlife, her encounters with phantom patients suggest that human awareness continues beyond clinical death. I can't prove that the phantom patients were objectively real rather than psychological phenomena, Rebecca admits. But they responded to care and comfort in ways that suggested genuine consciousness and emotional needs. Rebecca's approach to supernatural phenomena emphasizes practical compassion over theological or philosophical debate. Whether phantom patients represent actual spirits or psychological manifestations, they deserve the same dignity and care that healthcare professionals provide to all patients. The question isn't whether ghosts are real, Rebecca says. The question is how healthcare workers should respond when they encounter phenomena that seem to involve patient needs that can't be addressed through conventional medical intervention. Rebecca's work has helped establish ethical frameworks for supernatural healthcare encounters that prioritize patient dignity, staff support, and professional integrity. Her approaches recognize that paranormal phenomena may be genuine experiences requiring appropriate response. Healthcare professionals have a duty to respond compassionately to any manifestation of patient distress, regardless of whether the patient is conventionally alive, Rebecca explains. Phantom patient care extends the principles of medical ethics into supernatural territory. Rebecca's experience has also taught her about the importance of self-care for healthcare workers who encounter traumatic or challenging situations. Her own burnout from phantom patient care serves as a cautionary example for other professionals working in spiritually demanding environments. Healthcare workers who encounter supernatural phenomena need specialized support systems, Rebecca reflects. Traditional employee assistance programs aren't designed to address the unique stresses of caring for phantom patients. Rebecca advocates for healthcare facilities to provide specialized counseling and support services for staff members who report paranormal encounters. Such programs should validate workers' experiences while helping them maintain healthy professional boundaries. Healthcare workers need to know that reporting supernatural experiences won't damage their careers or result in questions about their mental health. Rebecca says, institutions should create safe spaces for discussing unusual phenomena and developing appropriate response strategies. Rebecca's research into phantom patient care has revealed that supernatural healthcare encounters are far more common than most medical professionals admit. Her work suggests that many healthcare workers have experienced unexplained phenomena, but remain silent due to professional concerns. I estimate that at least 30% of healthcare workers have had experiences they couldn't explain through conventional means, Rebecca says. The actual percentage might be higher, but many people are reluctant to report supernatural encounters. Rebecca's advocacy for healthcare workers who encounter paranormal phenomena has led to policy changes at several major medical institutions. Hospitals are beginning to recognize that unusual staff reports may indicate legitimate workplace challenges requiring management attention. Healthcare facilities are learning that dismissing supernatural reports as signs of stress or mental illness can actually increase staff turnover and job dissatisfaction, Rebecca explains. Acknowledging and addressing unusual phenomena often improves workplace culture and employee retention. Rebecca's personal journey from phantom patient caregiver to healthcare administrator illustrates the importance of career adaptability for professionals working in challenging environments. Her ability to transform her supernatural healthcare experience into expertise in environmental psychology demonstrates resilience and creativity. My experience with phantom patients prepared me for career challenges I never could have anticipated, Rebecca reflects. Learning to provide care in impossible situations taught me problem-solving skills that have been valuable throughout my professional life. Chapter 19. The Teaching Hospital in Recent Years. Rebecca has been invited to share her expertise with medical students and healthcare professionals through guest lectures and continuing education programs. Her presentations on environmental psychology and unusual patient encounters have become popular at nursing schools and medical conferences. Medical students are often surprised to learn about supernatural phenomena in healthcare settings, Rebecca says. Most medical education programs don't prepare future healthcare workers for paranormal encounters, despite their frequency in clinical practice. Rebecca's teaching focuses on practical strategies for managing unusual patient encounters while maintaining professional competence and ethical standards. She emphasizes that responding compassionately to unexplained phenomena is consistent with medical values of patient-centered care. I teach healthcare students that their primary obligation is to respond to patient needs, regardless of whether those needs are expressed through conventional or unconventional means, Rebecca explains. Phantom patient care is simply an extension of good nursing and medical practice. Rebecca's lectures include case studies from her years at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital, with patient names and identifying details changed to protect confidentiality. These real-world examples help students understand how theoretical concepts apply in clinical practice. Students are fascinated by the phantom patient cases, Rebecca recalls. They ask thoughtful questions about how to balance scientific skepticism with compassionate care, and how to document unusual incidents professionally. Rebecca has developed simulation exercises that allow students to practice responding to supernatural healthcare scenarios in controlled educational environments. These exercises help future healthcare workers develop confidence and competence for managing unexpected situations. The simulations involve actors portraying phantom patients with various spiritual needs, Rebecca explains. Students practice providing comfort care, professional documentation, and appropriate boundary setting in supernatural scenarios. Rebecca's teaching has influenced a new generation of healthcare professionals who are better prepared to encounter paranormal phenomena. In their clinical practice, her students report feeling more confident about managing unusual situations and supporting colleagues who experience unexplained encounters. My former students contact me years later to share their own phantom patient experiences, Rebecca says. They feel comfortable discussing supernatural encounters because they learned that such experiences are normal aspects of healthcare work in certain environments. Rebecca has also developed educational materials for healthcare administrators who need to manage facilities with reported paranormal activity. Her training programs help administrators balance institutional credibility with employee support and patient satisfaction. Healthcare administrators learn that acknowledging supernatural phenomena doesn't require believing in ghosts. Rebecca explains. They can support staff members and address workplace challenges without making official statements about paranormal reality. Rebecca's educational work has contributed to a gradual shift in healthcare culture toward greater openness about spiritual dimensions of patient care. Medical institutions are beginning to recognize that supernatural experiences may be meaningful aspects of healing and dying processes. Healthcare is slowly acknowledging that patients' spiritual needs are as important as their physical symptoms. Rebecca reflects, whether those needs involve conventional religious practices or paranormal encounters, they deserve professional attention and respect. Rebecca's influence on healthcare education extends beyond supernatural phenomena to broader issues of environmental psychology and patient experience. Her work has helped establish patient comfort and satisfaction as priorities equal to clinical outcomes. Healthcare facilities are learning that atmosphere, environment, and staff attitudes significantly affect patient outcomes, Rebecca says. The principles of phantom patient care, compassion, dignity, and responsiveness improve care for all patients. Rebecca continues to receive invitations to speak at medical conferences and professional meetings about her unique expertise in supernatural healthcare management. Her presentations consistently receive high ratings from healthcare professionals seeking practical guidance for unusual situations. Healthcare workers appreciate learning from someone who has actually managed paranormal phenomena rather than just theorized about them. Rebecca explains. My practical experience provides credibility that purely academic approaches often lack. Chapter 20. The next generation. As Rebecca's career enters its fourth decade, she has begun mentoring younger healthcare professionals who report supernatural encounters in their own clinical practice. These mentoring relationships allow her to pass on the wisdom gained from her years of phantom patient care, while supporting a new generation of spiritually sensitive healthcare workers. I receive emails and phone calls from nurses and doctors across the country who are experiencing paranormal phenomena in their healthcare facilities, Rebecca says. They often feel isolated and uncertain about how to respond to supernatural encounters while maintaining their professional credibility. Rebecca's mentoring focuses on helping healthcare workers develop practical strategies for managing phantom patient encounters without compromising their careers or mental health. She emphasizes the importance of professional boundaries and self-care. In supernatural healthcare situations, the mistake I made at St. Catherine's was taking personal responsibility for every phantom patient's welfare. Rebecca reflects. I teach younger professionals to provide compassionate care while maintaining healthy limits on their spiritual caregiving responsibilities. Rebecca has established an informal network of healthcare professionals who have experience with paranormal phenomena in medical settings. This network provides peer support and consultation for workers dealing with supernatural challenges in their institutions. Healthcare workers need colleagues who understand the unique stresses of phantom patient care, Rebecca explains. Traditional professional support systems aren't designed for supernatural healthcare encounters, so we've created our own community. Rebecca's network includes nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists, social workers, and healthcare administrators from facilities across North America. Members share experiences, strategies, and resources for managing paranormal phenomena in healthcare settings. The network demonstrates that supernatural healthcare encounters are a widespread phenomenon affecting professionals in many different types of medical facilities, Rebecca says. We're not isolated incidents. We're part of a larger pattern that deserves recognition and study. Rebecca has begun documenting the experiences shared by network members with the goal of publishing research about phantom patient care and supernatural healthcare phenomena. Her planned book will be the first comprehensive guide to managing paranormal encounters in medical settings. Healthcare professionals need practical resources for dealing with supernatural phenomena, Rebecca explains. Academic research about paranormal activity exists, but there's very little guidance specifically designed for healthcare workers who encounter phantom patients. Rebecca's book project has attracted the attention of medical publishers who recognize the need for professional resources addressing supernatural healthcare encounters. The publication will represent a significant milestone in legitimizing phantom patient care as a specialized area of healthcare practice. Publishing a professional guide to phantom patient care will help establish supernatural healthcare encounters as legitimate workplace challenges requiring appropriate management strategies. Rebecca says, healthcare workers deserve support and resources for dealing with paranormal phenomena. Rebecca's influence on healthcare culture continues to grow as more institutions recognize the importance of addressing spiritual dimensions of patient care. Her work has contributed to policy changes at major medical centers and influenced educational curricula at nursing and medical schools. Healthcare is slowly evolving toward greater recognition of patients' spiritual and emotional needs, Rebecca reflects. Whether those needs involve conventional religious practices, psychological support, or paranormal encounters, they're becoming accepted aspects of comprehensive patient care. Rebecca's daughter has decided to pursue a career in psychology with a focus on healthcare applications. Influenced by her mother's work with phantom patients and supernatural healthcare encounters, she hopes to continue Rebecca's research into consciousness and paranormal phenomena in medical settings. My daughter represents the next generation of professionals who will study supernatural healthcare encounters from both practical and theoretical perspectives, Rebecca says. She's growing up with an understanding that paranormal phenomena are normal aspects of human experience that deserve scientific attention. Rebecca's legacy in healthcare extends far beyond her individual experiences. With phantom patients at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital, her work has helped establish supernatural healthcare encounters as legitimate professional challenges requiring specialized knowledge and skills. Epilogue, the continuing journey today. Rebecca Martinez continues her work as a healthcare administrator and consultant, applying the lessons learned from her extraordinary experiences at St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital to improve patient care and support healthcare workers across the medical industry. Her journey from night shift nurse to paranormal healthcare expert illustrates the unexpected directions that professional careers can take when individuals remain open to experiences that challenge conventional understanding. My time at St. Catherine's taught me that healthcare involves dimensions that medical school doesn't prepare us for, Rebecca reflects. Patients are complex beings with spiritual as well as physical needs, and those needs don't necessarily end when clinical death occurs. Rebecca's story serves as a reminder that healthcare professionals encounter mysteries that resist easy explanation, and that responding with compassion and professionalism is more important than understanding the mechanisms behind unusual phenomena. St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital building is gone, demolished over a decade ago to make room for commercial development. But the lessons learned within its walls continue to influence healthcare practice through Rebecca's work and the professionals she has trained and mentored. St. Catherine's was a place where the boundary between life and death was particularly thin, Rebecca says. Working there taught me that consciousness and caring connections may survive bodily death in ways that science doesn't yet understand. Whether the phantom patients at St. Catherine's represented actual spirits or psychological phenomena, they served as teachers who helped Rebecca and her colleagues develop greater sensitivity to patient needs and deeper understanding of the human dimensions of healthcare. The phantom patients taught me that all patients, living or dead, deserve dignity, compassion, and professional care. Rebecca concludes, "They reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place, to provide comfort and healing to those who suffer." Rebecca's work continues to influence healthcare facilities across the country as more institutions recognize the importance of addressing spiritual dimensions of patient care. Her legacy demonstrates that healthcare professionals can provide excellent medical care while remaining open to the mysteries and miracles that occur in places where life and death intersect. In the end, Rebecca's story is about more than ghosts in a hospital. It's about the dedication of healthcare professionals who extend their care beyond conventional boundaries, the importance of maintaining compassion in the face of the inexplicable, and the recognition that healing involves more than treating physical symptoms. The night shifts continue at hospitals across the world, and somewhere other healthcare workers are encountering phenomena they cannot easily explain. Rebecca's story offers them hope that such experiences can be managed professionally and compassionately, and that caring for the mysterious dimensions of human existence is not incompatible with excellent medical practice. As Rebecca often tells the healthcare workers she mentors, the most important question isn't whether what you're experiencing is real. The most important question is how you can respond with the professionalism and compassion that all patients, in whatever form they appear, deserve.